But then we gotta shift gears and talk about massive international news. Because in less than a week, 3 strikes in 3 different places have seemingly shattered any hope of an Israel-Hamas ceasefire and brought the entire region the closest that it's been to an all-out war in years. And we'll get to the latest news, but I mean, this all started on Sunday, because that's when a rocket fired from Lebanon killed at least 12 children and teens at a soccer field in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. With that, you had Israel as well as the US blaming Hezbollah, though they denied responsibility. But in any case, you had Israeli officials promising that Hezbollah would pay the price. Netanyahu vowing a harsh response, and the Israeli cabinet officially authorizing the government to respond. But then at the same time, you had Israeli officials saying they wanted to avoid all-out war. And so as the whole region just readied itself for whatever that response would be, the whole world was watching and hoping that it wouldn't be something that would spark a wider regional war. With that, then bringing us to yesterday, where Israel carried out a strike in the southern suburbs of the Lebanese capital of Beirut that it says killed a senior Hezbollah commander. Also, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health, 3 people, including 2 children, were also killed in the attack and 74 people were injured. But the target, right, that senior Hezbollah commander, Israel says he was the one responsible for the rocket attack over the weekend. And in fact, he was a hell of a lot more than just that. He reportedly served as the right-hand man to the leader of Hezbollah, with Israeli officials also saying he was responsible for most of the group's advanced weaponry, including precise guided missiles, long-range rockets, and UAVs. And then on top of that, the US had been offering a $5 million reward for information about him for years. And that because he allegedly played a key role in the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that killed 241 American military personnel. But in any case, no matter how bad this guy was, the reality is that a strike like this is relatively unprecedented in terms of this current conflict. Because even though Israel and Hezbollah have been trading fire on an almost daily basis for the past 10 months, a direct attack on Beirut, I mean, that's something that Israel's generally avoided. I mean, yes, they did assassinate a high-ranking Hamas official with an airstrike there back in January, but really, other than that, the last time Israeli forces had targeted the city was during a brief war back in the summer of 2006. And in fact, the leader of Hezbollah has repeatedly said that any Israeli strike on the Lebanese capital would prompt a Hezbollah attack on Tel Aviv. And actually, you had Lebanon's foreign minister telling CNN the day before the strike that an Israeli attack in the southern suburbs of Beirut or the international airport would, quote, surely lead to war. So after the strike, you had him saying, that's what we're afraid of, and hopefully this will not produce a war. We did not expect to be hit in Beirut. We thought these were red lines that the Israelis would respect. But then with that, you had Israel's defense minister writing on X, Hezbollah crossed the red line. And then an Israeli military spokesperson saying, Hezbollah's ongoing aggression and brutal attacks are dragging the people of Lebanon and the entire Middle East into a wider escalation. While we prefer to resolve hostilities without a wider war, the IDF is fully prepared for any scenario. Right? And so ultimately, you had the situation where things were already looking like a bit of a powder keg. But then things just went from bad to worse. Because you see, within hours of the strike on Beirut, Israel hit another Middle East capital, with this specifically an alleged Israeli strike killing Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Reportedly, he was there attending the inauguration of Iran's new president. And so actually with that, you had the new president saying he would make Israel regret the cowardly killing of the Hamas leader, and adding that Iran would defend its territorial integrity, honor, pride, and dignity. But then Iran's supreme leader chiming in with a statement saying, we consider his revenge as our duty, and adding that Israel had, quote, prepared a harsh punishment for itself by killing a dear guest in our home. But then finally there, Hamas's military wing saying in a statement that the assassination, quote, takes the battle to new dimensions and will have major repercussions on the entire region. And at that point, we're already seeing those repercussions happening, right? Because Iran is already looking to make good on its threats, with the supreme leader reportedly issuing an order to strike Israel directly. And as of recording, it's still unclear when or how forceful this response will be, but it's got a lot of people worried. And again, like with Israel and Hezbollah, conflict between Israel and Iran, it's not new. I mean, the two countries already came close to war in April of this year after strikes attributed to Israel destroyed an Iranian consulate building in Damascus, with that then leading to unprecedented retaliatory strikes on Israel from Iran, and then an Israeli attack on an Iranian base. And then on top of all that, Israel is believed to have been covertly assassinating people in Iran for years. Like in 2020, for example, a top nuclear scientist was killed by a remote-controlled machine gun while traveling in a car outside the capital. But also, again, this specific case is a bit different, with, for example, one expert telling the Associated Press that this latest assassination sends a clear message that Israel can target anywhere in Iran, and adding there that this time an important difference is that there is a question of the safety of senior officials, because the Hamas leader was a guest right in the heart of the country's capital. He was literally brushing shoulders with the Iranian political elite all day yesterday. Like, he was surrounded by a group of Iranian lawmakers after the new president's swearing-in ceremony. And earlier, I mean, he even met face-to-face with Iran's supreme leader. And then, of course, the other big thing is that unlike past incidents that sparked fears of escalations, there's just a lot more going on right now. Right? I mean, there's Israel's operation in Gaza, there's the Houthis, and of course, there's Hezbollah. And I mean, to that point, besides the Beirut strike, this just pissed them off even more. The group sharing a statement in response to the strike in Iran saying his martyrdom will, quote, increase increase the determination and stubbornness of the resistance fighters in all resistance arenas to continue the path of jihad and will make the resolve stronger in confronting the Zionist enemy. And in fact, you had Lebanon's foreign minister explicitly acknowledging how the two strikes are related, saying, if it was limited to Lebanon, we would be sure that the retaliation will not lead to war, but now it is out of our hands. You're talking about Iran. I went to bed yesterday thinking that, okay, this can still be managed. But now when I got up this morning and read about Haniyeh, I thought, oh gosh, it's over. And so with that, you had one Western diplomat whose country has worked to prevent an Israeli-Hezbollah escalation telling the AP, the double strikes in Beirut and Tehran have almost killed hopes for a Gaza ceasefire and could push the Middle East into a devastating regional war. Also, on the subject of the ceasefire, one of the things that makes this assassination even more damaging is the fact that the Hamas leader killed was the one directly involved in negotiations. In fact, you had one source telling CNN that he was instrumental in achieving certain breakthroughs. So you have people like the Qatari PM who's helping mediate the ceasefire talks saying, political assassinations and continued targeting of civilians in Gaza while talks continue leads us to ask, how can mediation succeed when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side? And that criticism is also coming from within Israel as well. With, for example, one left-wing lawmaker accusing Netanyahu of jeopardizing the safety of the hostages, writing Haniyeh was a hardened war criminal, but that's not the point. The issue is giving up the abductees and deliberately sacrificing them to death in agony, with them then going on to describe Netanyahu and his supporters as pyromaniacs bent on setting the region on fire. But then also other events in Israel just showing how the divisions there have been getting deeper and deeper. For example, on Monday, far-right protesters and at least one lawmaker stormed a couple of Israeli military bases after 9 reservists suspected of participating in the abuse of a Palestinian prisoner were detained. And also with that, just this week, we're learning more about how bad the conditions are for Palestinian detainees, with a new report from the UN Human Rights Office saying thousands of Palestinians have been forcibly removed from Gaza, sometimes from bomb shelters, and dragged into detention in Israel. And there, some have been tortured and dozens have died. But with all that, beyond this affecting a ceasefire, another bit of the fallout from all this could actually be to further strengthen Hamas, especially in the occupied West Bank. Or before Israel's invasion, open support for Hamas in the West Bank, it was pretty rare. But since December or so, polls have showed that the group's popularity has been soaring there. And in fact, more recently, reporting from the New York Times described how Palestinian militants in the West Bank are now actually looking to emulate Hamas. And with that, Hamas is now saying today that it has carried out 2 shooting operations in the West Bank in response to the killing of the group's leader in Iran. And then on top of that, hundreds of Palestinian demonstrators marched in the occupied West Bank to protest the assassination, and notably, many carried Hamas flags, so that's another front to watch. With Israel having already ramped up its military activity in the West Bank, and this could be part of an even further escalation there as well. With that and all the news breaking today, the most attention is still on the border with Lebanon, with the Israeli military now saying it's preparing for, quote, combat in the northern arena and practicing a variety of extreme scenarios, including combat in a built-up area. That said, the Israeli foreign minister says a full-scale war with Hezbollah could be prevented if a UN resolution banning armed groups other than the Lebanese military or UN peacekeepers from operating near the border is enforced, with him also specifically saying Israel is not interested in an all-out war, but the only way to prevent it is the immediate implementation of Resolution 1701. But then at the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a televised address that didn't really alleviate people's concerns, with him saying, quote, from the beginning of the war, I clarified we are in a struggle with Iran's axis of evil, and saying, for months, people haven't stopped telling me end the war. I didn't surrender to these voices then, and I will not now. And finally saying, we're not going to be silent, we'll make everyone pay the price. And then zooming out, looking at the broader international response, the UN Security Council actually held an emergency meeting today to respond to all the chaos. And at that meeting, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said through a spokesperson that the attacks in Beirut and Tehran represent a dangerous escalation in the region, and adding, this should be a moment in which all efforts should instead be leading to a ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all Israeli hostages, a massive increase of humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza, and a return to calm in Lebanon and across the Blue Line. And as this has been playing out, we saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying a ceasefire is imperative, with him also noting that the U.S. was not aware of or involved in the killing and said he would not speculate on the impact of the assassination. You also had Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin striking a similar tone, saying he doesn't think the war is inevitable. But with that and with all the news breaking today, there's less attention on the West Bank than on the border with Lebanon.